Hello, my fellow studiers. Glad to have you back at the Journey of Truth. I hope that I didn't take too long in getting chapter 2 out. I know that you were patiently waiting, and I was anxious about getting it out. Um, I hope you took some notes from chapter 1, so that way the notes that you take from chapter 2 will come together. And I appreciate if you do, because I'm going to give you a lot of new information. Um, Alkebulan, or Africa, was always under conflict, and we were always tasked with the job of protecting the greatest continent in the world. Not because I say so, because everything says so. Resources, animals, people, information, everything was stolen from Africa, and that's what gave it its greatness, or made it great. Well, we ended with the invasion of Rome in 30 BCE, and how they basically ruined Egypt and took the whole greatness of Egypt and sent it back to Rome, as far as the wheat and the animals and the gold and everything in Egypt was sent to build Rome. They built up a European forefront, or Greco-Roman forefront, in Africa, and what this brought was a lot of border skirmishes and incursions from the Nubians, because they jumped on the offensive when they lost Egypt, and they just started invading it and trying to get it back. Well, in 23 BCE, Roman governor of Egypt, Publius Petronius, what he did was he invaded Nubia to stop the Nubian raids, and to make us jump on the defensive back again, and protect Nubia, because they were coming more south. Well, the military leaders at that time were women, and they were the women. They were the queens, because the kings were being killed in the war or the invasions from Rome and the other countries. Well, they were called the Kandaks, and the Kandak means queen, queen mother, or royal woman. And you can find the allegory of this in the Bible, where it talks about Acts chapter 8, verse 27, where it talks about how an angel sent Philip to a land, and Philip, he met an Ethiopian eunuch, or an official of a Kandak. Well, it says the official was over the treasury. Well, the official, he was reading the book of Isaiah, and Philip asked him if he knew what he was reading. And he told him, he said, well, how can I if no one explains it to me? Well, the Philip breaks it down for the official. They go travel, and then the official, he spots a body of water, and he asks him, he said, well, do you think you can baptize me? Well, Philip, he baptizes him, and immediately after the baptizing, Philip is taken away with the Spirit. The Spirit of the Lord took Philip away. Now, whether I believe that this really happened, or this is the truth, or whatever, they tell you everything else. They tell you that there's an Ethiopian official, he's over the treasury, that Philip was sent by an angel, the Spirit of the Lord, the book of Isaiah. They tell you everything about the whole story, but they don't tell you about the Kandak, or the queen mother, or the queen woman, or the royal woman at the time. And that is the most important part, because the official is working for her. I think it's important that we know who she is, and people would ask that question, because if you say queen woman or queen mother, you would say who, so Candace, she ruled Meroe from 40 BCE to 10 BCE, and her husband was killed in 24 BCE in war, like I said before, and she led the Kushite armies against the Romans in a 5-year war from 27 BCE to 22 BCE. And she was masculine, she was blind in one eye, she was big, and a lot of the kings and queens, they had scars on their face, and this was a physical beauty. This was regarded as physical beauty, and it was very common in Central Africa at that time, because, like I said, there was a lot of conflict. Well, Roman Egypt was being ran by Cleopatra, and she was of the Ptolemy dynasty. And we're going to flash back a little bit. There was a guy named Gaius Octavius Thurinus, and he was the nephew of Julius Caesar, who died in 44 BCE. And Gaius, he formed the Second Triumvirate, and this was a political alliance between He and Mark Antony and Marcus Aurelius Lepidus, and they came together November the 27th in 43 BCE. And like I said, they were all splitting the spoils of war as they conquered different lands. So Octavian, what he did was he created the Praetorian Guard. This was an elite army unit of the Roman Legion, and it was the Emperor's Royal Guard. They escorted the high-ranking officials, and they served for 3 centuries. They were so powerful that they ousted emperors, or they killed emperors, and they were proclaimed the successor, and they had a lot of power. Well, they were disbanded by Constantine in 312 AD. And I tell you all of this because eventually Mark Antony and Octavian, they get into this war. They get into this war because Octavian wasn't sharing his fair share of the spoils with our Mark Antony. Mark Antony was married to his sister, and they were living in Italy. Well, the Battle of Actium was the final war between the two, and Octavian wins. Mark Antony, he's trying to get a hold of Egypt. He sends Octavian's sister back to Rome to Octavian. He goes to Egypt, Alexandria to be exact, and he hooks up with Cleopatra, and he becomes the de facto of Egypt. Now, what this means is that if something was to happen to Cleopatra or her eldest son, which was Ptolemy the Philopator, or Khazari or Khazar or Khazarian, if something were to happen to either one of them, because he was the last pharaoh of Egypt, if something was to happen to either one of them, that Mark Antony would be the successor to the throne in Egypt. Now, they were still at war with Octavian. Octavian wins the war, and he adopts the title Princeps. Princeps means first citizen, and years later he was rewarded with the name Augustus. Now this is going to be very important, and that's why I brought him up, because he's very important to the whole dismantling of Nubia and Napata and Meroe. Now, in 24 BCE, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to our present time. That was our flashback in our movie, but now we're back to 24 BCE in the present time. Now, there was a war at 27. The war started in 27 BCE. Now, this is only 3 years after the invasion. Rome has set up their whole forefront. We were constantly in conflict with them. 27 BCE was the start of the war, but 24 BCE was the beginning of the major war. And Candace and her son, Akinadad, they won the first battle. And it was in CN, and they defeated Rome, and they ran the Jews out of the Elephantine Island. But 23 BCE, Petronius, like I said, he sacked Napata, and he came down in 22 BCE to try to take over Meroe. Well, in the book Divine Deeds, Augustus, he describes his penetration into Napata and next into Meroe. So that lets you know that they were trying to move south and take over more. And if you remember in the last chapter, we talked about how Meroe and Napata and Nubia had the Kushite gold mines, and how it had a lot of other very, very important resources that we needed or we used for our survival. Nubians, they crossed the lower border of Egypt, and they went looting. So what they did was they start taking the Roman statues, and they took a lot of the Roman statues, and the head of Augustus, there was a bronze statue of Augustus. Well, they chopped it off. When they chopped it off, they took it and they hid it under the temple stairs in Meroe. Well, it wasn't found until 1912. All of the other statues were taken were regained by Rome, and they were all regained in full altogether. They weren't dismantled. So the only thing that wasn't regained was the head of Augustus. There was a peace treaty between the Romans and Candace, and this happened in 22 BCE because there was so much war. They figured like they had to do something. So they made a peace treaty, and the Romans, what they decided to do was to say that, okay, well, we'll leave Meroe and we'll leave Napata and we'll go back north, and we'll go back to Egypt, and we won't come down here, and we won't make you guys pay tribute, or which is taxes, and the Nubians wouldn't invade Egypt again. Well, they decided to leave, but they left a garrison, and the garrison was called the Khazar Ibrahim, and what that is basically a watchdog, or the rule or jurisdiction of a territory or a prefecture or a region. And it was a religious center, a political center, and a military front for Rome. And it was in the Nubian territory, and it was bad for Nubian inhabitants, but really good for Roman inhabitants. So this lasted from the 8th century all the way till 1813 CE. And the Nubians, their last big attempt to get them out, they put a big army together, and they went to attack the Khazar breed. And Petronius, again, hearing that they were going to attack, he brought forces down from Egypt, and he fortified the front, and he stopped the attack from the Nubians from taking over the Khazar breed. And in Nubia, Christianity began to gain ground. And what happened was the old pharaonic religion that we believed in, or that we had, it started to dismantle or dissolve. And this came in from the first contacts of the Roman Christians. And in the mid 6th century AD, the kingdom of Kush and Meroe was dissolved, was totally dissolved, and it was taken over by three different invaders: Mercuria, Nabatea, and Alodia. And if you look them up, they were also invaders from outside, or from the Saudi Arabia area. Now, I want to tell you also that as we close this, our next chapter is going to be very, very important, because as you see, everybody had their hands out for Egypt. Everybody was really in for it for Egypt, and the conflict was us trying to keep everybody out of what we had already built up thousands of generations before anybody had even came to Africa. So our next studies will be how, like I said before, the Bible feels about Africa or Africans. Now, before you question it, or before you question me and say, "Well, Mike, that's a bad assessment," I want to break down to you in the Bible, and I want you to realize that the same people who wrote the Bible were in conflict with us through the whole time. So don't think that they're going to give you a good grace or a good word, or that the Bible is for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to get deeper into the woods, and I hope you stick with me, and I hope that you like and subscribe to these videos, because we need all the support that we need. And like I said before, I thank you for coming back to the journey, because we're going to find out the truth. Ashe.